I bought a small house on the Oregon coast with 38 years of savings just to finally hear the ocean instead of office noise. Then my son-in-law called and told me his sister's family was moving in. I didn't argue. I just made sure they'd never want to stay. The check cleared on a Tuesday in February. I remember because the escrow officer, a woman named Carol with reading glasses perched on her nose, slid the keys across the desk like she was dealing cards, and I sat there thinking, this is the quietest moment of my adult life. No ringing phones, no quarterly reports, no one asking me anything. The house was in Cannon Beach, not on the postcard side where tourists rented vacation homes for $3,000 a week, but up a gravel road half a mile from the main drag, where the lots were bigger and the neighbors were mostly retirees who waved from their driveways and left you alone. 1,200 square feet, cedar siding gone gray from salt air, a deck facing west where you could watch the sun drop into the Pacific on clear evenings. I paid $313,000 for it. 38 years of teaching high school history, coaching JV baseball for no extra pay, skipping every vacation that cost more than a tank of gas. 4 decades of small decisions compressed into one wire transfer. I drove up from Sacramento the next morning with my truck loaded. Books, tools, a cast-iron skillet I'd had since my 30s, the dog, a 7-year-old lab named Chester, who pressed his nose against the passenger window the whole drive up I-5, and then US 26 until we hit the Coast Range and the air changed and he started making a sound I'd never heard him make before. We pulled into the driveway around 4 in the afternoon. The ocean was 200 yards west, hidden behind a low ridge of Sitka spruce, but you could hear it. Low and constant, like the house was breathing. I called my daughter from the porch. "Dad," Sophie's voice came through warm and immediate. "Are you there? Is it everything you wanted?" "More," I said. Chester was already exploring the yard, nose to the ground, tail going in circles. I'm sitting on the deck watching a heron work, the tide pool at the base of the ridge. "I don't think I'm going to move for a while." She laughed. "You've been saying that for 30 years. This time I mean it." We talked for 20 minutes. Her teaching schedule, her garden, the leak in her kitchen ceiling that her husband Marcus kept saying he'd fix. She laughed things off in the way she did when she didn't want to worry me, and I noticed it, but didn't push. "Come visit whenever," I said. "Room's already made up." "Soon," she said. "Love you, Dad." I sat on that deck until the heron left and the sun touched the water, and Chester fell asleep against my leg, and I thought, this is exactly enough. The phone rang an hour later. "My sister's family needs a place." Marcus didn't say hello. He had a particular voice for delivering news he'd already decided wasn't negotiable. Flat, slightly bored, like he was reading from a memo. Darren lost his job. They've got 2 kids and they're getting evicted from their rental in Portland. They can stay with you for a couple months while they get back on their feet. I looked at Chester, who had raised his head and was watching me with that dog expression that reads as either sympathy or mild hunger. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I just moved in this afternoon. I know the timing isn't great. This isn't a guest house. It's 1,200 square feet. I bought it to live alone." "Their family, Owen." The use of my name like that, clipped, corrective, like I'd missed an obvious point, landed wrong. "You have a house," I said, 3 bedrooms. "We don't have the room." "You have more room than I do." Silence. "Then, I'm not asking, Owen. They need help and you have space. They'll be there Friday. I'll send you Darren's number." The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment holding the phone, looking at the ocean I couldn't see but could hear, and I thought about the 38 years that had bought this quiet and what it was worth, and what I was willing to do to protect it. Chester put his head back on his paws. Smart dog. I went inside and made coffee I didn't need and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad I'd brought specifically for lesson planning and started writing. Not out of anger, out of habit. When I taught, I always planned 3 moves ahead: setup, problem, resolution. You don't respond to a disruption by reacting. You respond by already having the next step ready. By morning, I had 4 pages of notes. I spent Wednesday researching. The Oregon coast has its share of wildlife, but it was the coastal geology I was interested in first. The terrain, the access points. What a person arriving unfamiliar with the property would encounter. The house sat at the end of a private gravel road. The property line ran to within 30 feet of a steep bluff. The tide pools below were beautiful, but the path down was unmarked, unlit, and during high tide, genuinely hazardous. I knew this. A first-time visitor would not. I also made some calls. An old colleague from Sacramento, David Reinhold, had done real estate law for 20 years before retiring. We played golf badly together for a decade. I explained the situation in general terms, asked some questions about property rights and guest versus tenant status under Oregon law, and listened carefully. Uninvited house guests become tenants faster than people think in this state, David said, especially with kids. If they establish residency, mail, utilities, anything official, getting them out legally takes months. How do I prevent that? Documentation that they were never invited, and don't let them receive mail there under any circumstances. I thanked him and ended the call. Thursday morning, I drove into Cannon Beach and bought 2 things: a trail camera system from the outdoor supply store on Hemlock Street, and 20 pounds of fresh fish scraps from a commercial processor at the harbor who sold byproduct to crabbers for bait. The cameras were wireless, solar-powered, motion-activated, the kind used for property monitoring, wildlife observation, nothing exotic. I set one at the driveway entrance, angled to capture license plates, one at the front door, one covering the deck. The fish scraps I carried in a cooler to the bluff edge at the northwest corner of my property. I didn't put them near the house. I put them at the base of the Sitka spruce stand, upwind of the driveway, well outside any walking path a reasonable person would use. The Oregon coast in February does not lack for scavengers. Raccoons, coyotes, the occasional black bear working down from the coast range. I knew this from the research I'd done before buying, and from a conversation with my neighbor Al, a retired fish and wildlife biologist who'd lived on that road for 19 years. I wasn't trying to harm anyone. I was trying to educate them about what coastal Oregon actually is when you're not on the tourist side of it. I drove back to Sacramento Thursday night and checked the camera feeds from my laptop in my old house, which hadn't sold yet. I sat in the living room with Chester and a glass of bourbon and waited. Friday morning at 9:40, a silver minivan with Oregon plates pulled up my driveway on the small screen. Darren got out first. He was Marcus's age, mid-30s, baseball cap, expression of someone who'd been told he was doing someone a favor by accepting this arrangement. His wife Jolene stood by the passenger door looking at the house with an expression that was harder to read. Not gratitude, exactly. Assessment, maybe. Their 2 kids, both under 10, tumbled out and immediately ran toward the far corner of the property where the spruce trees met the bluff. The camera picked up their voices, but not the words. Then I heard Jolene, "It smells like low tide." "It's the ocean," Darren said. "Everything smells like this." I thought it would be more like the pictures. They tried the door. Locked. The Briton tried calling someone, Marcus probably, and then a minute later my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. What happened next I watched on the camera. The kids had reached the edge of the spruce stand and stopped. Even on the small screen I could see them pointing at something on the ground near the fish scraps. A large shape moved in the trees. A black bear. 2nd year by the look of it. Working the bait pile I'd placed. Not aggressive. Not interested in the children specifically. Just startled by the sudden noise of 2 kids. The bear stood up on its hind legs. It was maybe 40 yards from the house. Jolene screamed. She was across the property in 10 seconds, scooping both kids toward the minivan. Darren sprinted behind them. The door slammed. The engine started before all four were fully inside. The bear watched them go, dropped back to all fours, and returned to the fish scraps. I closed the laptop and let Chester out into the Sacramento backyard and poured the rest of the bourbon down the sink because it was before noon. 20 minutes later, Marcus called. "What is wrong with you?" "Not a question." "Good morning, Marcus. There's a bear on your property. My sister's kids nearly got mauled. Bears are native to coastal Oregon. I have a neighbor who's tracked them on this road for 2 decades. I should have mentioned the wildlife situation more clearly. You put something out to attract it. I bought this property because it's in a natural area. The coast isn't Disneyland. Maybe a rental in Seaside would be more appropriate for a family with young children. You did this on purpose. I have a wildlife camera that caught the entire interaction. The bear approached a naturally occurring area of the property, not the house. Your family wasn't in any danger. This isn't over." "I agree," I said. "It's just beginning." I hung up and sat down at my kitchen table in Sacramento with the legal pad again. The first move was done. Now I needed to be several moves ahead. I called David Reinhold that afternoon. The family didn't enter the property, I told him. No residency established, but Marcus is going to push again. You need to get ahead of this legally. Do you have a will? Trust structure? A basic will, nothing sophisticated. At your age, with the property worth that much, you need a revocable living trust, especially if you're anticipating family conflict over the asset. He referred me to an estate attorney in Portland, a woman named Carol Fitch, different Carol, who specialized in elder law and asset protection. I called her office that afternoon and scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday. That weekend I drove back to Cannon Beach. The house was exactly as I'd left it. The camera showed nothing unusual since the bear's departure. Al, my neighbor, came over Saturday morning with coffee and we sat on the deck, and I told him what had happened. Al had seen more in 19 years on that road than most wildlife biologists see in a career. "You baited the bear," he said. He wasn't accusing, he was confirming. "I put fish scraps at the bluff edge, within the natural range. And the camera got it. Every second." He looked at the ocean for a minute. "Smart," he said. Then he went home. Tuesday, I met with Carol Fitch in Portland. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building on SW 5th, with a view of Mount Hood on clear days. She was 60, brisk, direct, with a manner of someone who had heard every variation of family financial manipulation and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. I laid out the situation the same way I'd always taught my students to lay out a historical argument, chronological, sourced without editorializing. The property purchase, Marcus's call, the attempted occupation, David's advice about residency risk. She listened, made notes, asked 3 questions. Then she told me what she saw. "Your son-in-law is probably operating from a combination of genuine family obligation and an assumption that you're emotionally manageable," she said. "People do this with elderly parents and in-laws. They mistake patience for weakness. The solution is to make your position legally impenetrable before he makes his next move." What does that look like? Revocable living trust. You control it completely during your lifetime. Your daughter inherits through the trust, but any inheritance is conditional on her not being married to someone who has made a documented claim against your property. That's a significant condition. It's a protective condition. If your daughter is in a healthy marriage with someone who respects your autonomy, it never comes into effect. If she's with someone who's trying to maneuver your assets out from under you, it protects her as much as you. I looked at Mount Hood through the window. "Do it," I said. The trust took 2 weeks to draft. While it was in process, the calls came. Marcus first, 3 days after the bear incident. Same flat tone, new approach. "You're isolating yourself up there." Sophie's worried. Sophie was fine when I spoke to her Tuesday. She doesn't want to say it directly, because she doesn't want to upset you, but we're both concerned. A man your age, alone in a remote area. I'm 63, Marcus. I coached baseball until last year. I'm not a shut-in. The bear thing was a red flag. For who? He shifted. We've been talking to Sophie's cousin, Barbara. She's a social worker. She thinks you might benefit from having someone check in. There it was. The play I'd suspected was coming. Build a narrative. Eccentric, isolated, possibly declining, and use it as cover for the next move. Give Barbara my number, I said. I'd be happy to talk to her. I called Carol Fitch as soon as I hung up. They're building a competency narrative, she said. Standard playbook when there's property worth protecting. Get a medical evaluation immediately. Comprehensive, documented, stamped. I called my doctor in Sacramento, explained the situation, and scheduled a full cognitive and physical workup for the following Monday. When I arrived, I told Dr. Pearson exactly what I'd told Carol Fitch. He'd been my doctor for 16 years. He knew me. He also understood immediately what kind of documentation I needed. The exam took 90 minutes. Cognitive testing, memory assessment, blood work, reflex testing. When he handed me the written summary on clinic letterhead, it read, "Patient is in excellent physical health for his age. Cognitive function is sharp and within top percentile for 63-year-old adults. No evidence of diminished capacity, confusion, or impaired judgment. Patient is fully capable of managing his own affairs and property." I had him make 4 copies. 3 weeks after the bear incident, a woman appeared at my Cannon Beach door on a Wednesday afternoon. She had a county ID badge and a tablet, and introduced herself as a wellness visitor from Clatsop County Adult Services. She said she'd received a referral expressing concern about an elderly resident living alone in an isolated area. I invited her in and offered her tea. "I should be upfront with you," I said while the kettle heated. "I'm involved in a property dispute with family members who have made it clear they want access to this house. I believe this visit is connected to that dispute rather than genuine concern for my welfare." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why do you believe that?" "Because I was healthy, functional, and completely stable until I declined to let my son-in-law's relatives move in without my permission. The concern appears to have started at that exact moment." She took notes. I showed her the house. Clean kitchen, full refrigerator, organized medicine cabinet, bills filed by date in a folder on the desk. I showed her Dr. Pearson's evaluation. I showed her the camera footage of the bear incident and explained clearly what had happened. She looked at the footage for a long time. I'm sorry, you didn't give me your full name." "Owen Greer." "Mr. Greer, this is the most organized and documented response I've ever seen to a wellness referral. I was a high school teacher for 38 years. I believe in preparation." She wrote her report 3 days later. I obtained a copy through Carol Fitch. It stated that the referral appeared to be motivated by a family property dispute, that Mr. Greer was living independently and safely with no indication of diminished capacity or neglect, and that no further action was warranted. I filed it under false concern/official response. But the situation wasn't resolved. It had just changed shape. Sophie called on a Saturday morning, not Marcus, which was different. Her voice was careful in a way that told me she'd been coached on what to say. "Dad, I know you and Marcus have been having a hard time lately. He's just worried." "He really is." "I know you believe that, sweetheart. Can't you just, I don't know, meet with Darren and Jolene? Maybe help them find something in the area, a rental recommendation, something to show good faith?" I looked at the ocean through the kitchen window. Chester was asleep under the table. "I'll do that," I said. "Tell Marcus I'm willing to meet in Cannon Beach. Neutral coffee shop. Just Darren and Jolene and me." Her voice lifted. "Really?" "Really." We arranged it for the following Thursday. I spent 2 evenings preparing. I researched rental prices in Clatsop County, Seaside, Astoria, Warrenton. Printed 3 pages of listings. printed a letter from a local property manager with vacancy information. Brought all of it in a folder. The coffee shop on Hemlock Street was small, local, known to regulars. I arrived 15 minutes early, chose a table with my back to the wall and a clear view of the door. Darren and Jolene arrived together, didn't order anything, sat down across from me with expressions that had clearly been calibrated to project wronged dignity. "Owen," Darren said, "this has gone on long enough. Marcus says you've been acting different. We just need somewhere to land for a few months." "I understand you're in a difficult position," I said. I slid the folder across the table. "I've put together some rental options in the county. Several are pet-friendly. 2 are in good school districts." Jolene looked at the folder without touching it. "We're not looking for a rental. We need family support. I'm not able to provide housing in my home. That was never an option I offered. But I'm happy to help you find something that works for your family." "You could have just said yes," Darren said, leaning forward. "One phone call, we'd have been in and out in 8 weeks. "One phone call is what I'd got," I said quietly, "from Marcus, telling me, not asking, that you were arriving Friday. I didn't agree to that, and my property isn't available for that. Family helps family." I stood, picked up my coffee, collected my folder. "Family respects family," I said. "Good luck with the search." I drove home to Cannon Beach and sat on the deck and watched a gray whale breach about a quarter-mile offshore, which was not something you saw every day and which I took as a reasonable sign from the universe. The calls that evening were predictable. Marcus, Sophie's cousin Barbara, a former colleague of my late wife's who I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, all with slight variations on the same script. "Owen is being unreasonable. Owen is isolating. Owen needs to be checked on." What they didn't know was that I was recording every call with a disclaimer I'd started including at the beginning of each one. "Just so you know, I'm recording this conversation for my personal records." Most people kept talking anyway. The trust was ready 2 weeks later. I drove to Portland and signed 41 pages in Carol Fitch's conference room. The independent trustee was a Portland attorney she worked with regularly, a man named Jeff Strand, methodical and impartial in the way that made lawyers good at their jobs. My total assets in trust, the Cannon Beach property at appraised value, plus retirement accounts and savings, a significant sum. The conditional inheritance clause for Sophie was on page 20. "This clause," Carol said, pausing there, "you understand it may create conflict." "The conflict already exists," I said. "This just defines the terms. If Marcus finds out about this provision, he'll almost certainly escalate." "I'm counting on it." I signed. A week later, Sophie mentioned in a phone call that Marcus had been asking about my estate planning, whether I'd updated my will, whether the house was in a trust. She told him I'd set up a trust. I called Carol from the deck that evening. "He knows." "Cognitive evaluation already done?" "Yes." "Wellness visit already documented?" "Resolved in my favor." "Good. Then let him come." He did. The following Saturday, Marcus's car came up my gravel road faster than anyone should drive it, throwing gravel, and parked at an angle that blocked part of my walkway. I was on the deck replacing a board in the railing. I set down my tools, picked up my phone, and started recording before he reached the steps. He was red-faced, breathing hard from the walk from the car. "You're on my property without an invitation," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm recording this." "I don't care." He stopped at the base of the deck steps, looking up at me. "You set up some trust that cuts Sophie out if she stays married to me. That's what you did." "I set up a trust that protects Sophie from third-party claims against my property. That's what it does." "Third party? I'm her husband." "You have no legal claim to my property. The trust simply puts that in writing. She's your daughter. You're punishing her for being married to me. The trust ensures Sophie inherits my property cleanly, without complications. If there are no complications, the conditional clause is irrelevant." He stepped onto the first deck step. I didn't move. I'll contest it. I'll get a lawyer. I'll make this so difficult. Step back off my property, Marcus. Now. Something in my voice, the same voice that had managed 32 high schoolers for 38 years, landed where I intended it. He stopped. This isn't over. Leave, or I call the sheriff. He left. I uploaded the video to cloud storage and forwarded it to Carol Fitch with a subject line that said, "For the file." The next move I hadn't anticipated, but Carol had. 3 weeks later, through a combination of public record searches and Carol's paralegal doing some digging, something emerged about Marcus and Sophie's finances that I wish I hadn't found but couldn't ignore. Sophie's name wasn't on the HELOC Marcus had taken against their Portland house 14 months earlier. $40,000, Marcus's signature only. Under Oregon law, both spouses are typically required for a home equity loan. The exception exists, but it's narrow, and the bank would have documentation explaining why single signature approval was granted. When I learned the amount and the timing, 14 months ago, which was right around when Darren lost his job, the picture assembled itself without any help from me. Marcus had borrowed against his and Sophie's house to help his sister's family, without telling Sophie, and when that money was gone and Darren's situation hadn't improved, he'd looked around for the next available resource, and there I was, newly retired, newly settled, with a property he'd never once asked about before I bought it. I didn't tell Sophie immediately. I couldn't. Not without proof I could sit in front of her without her dismissing it as her father taking sides. Carol obtained certified copies of the relevant public records through a title company contact. I spent a week organizing everything: the HELOC documentation, the timeline, the wellness complaint and its resolution, the trust documents, Marcus's threatening visit on video. Then I asked Sophie to come for a weekend, just her. Told her there were things she needed to know about her financial situation. She arrived Friday afternoon in late April. The house smelled like the bread I'd baked that morning because I'd needed something to do with my hands. Chester met her at the door. We had coffee and talked about nothing for an hour. Her new classroom reading program, whether Chester's fur was getting grayer, the whale I'd seen from the deck. She kept glancing at the folder on the kitchen table. Finally she said, "Dad, what's in the folder?" I took a breath. "There are things about your financial situation Marcus hasn't told you." She laughed, short and nervous. "Like what?" "He handles the bills I know we're a little behind on." She stopped. "How behind?" "Your house has a home equity loan against it. $40,000, Marcus's name only." She went still. "That's not possible. We both have to sign." I slid the bank documents across the table. She read them slowly, hands becoming very still. The color left her face in stages. "When did this happen?" 14 months ago. Around when Darren lost his job." She looked up at me. "He borrowed against our house to help Darren." "That's the most likely explanation." "Without telling me. Without telling you." She was quiet for a long time. Chester came over and put his head in her lap, which was what he did when someone was upset, because dogs understand things we don't. I showed her the rest in order. The wellness complaint Marcus had triggered, she hadn't known. The video of Marcus's confrontation on my deck. The trust structure and what the conditional clause actually meant, which was the opposite of what Marcus had told her. When I showed her the wellness complaint, she put her face in her hands. "He tried to use the adult services system to build a case against you," I said quietly. "He told me the wellness visit was Barbara's idea, that Barbara had reached out on her own." It wasn't. The complaint lists Marcus as the reporting party. She didn't cry the way I expected. She got very quiet, which with Sophie has always been more serious than tears. After a while she said, "How long have you known?" "About the HELOC 3 weeks. About the rest, pieces, since February. Everything together, recently." "You waited. If I'd called you in February, would you have believed me? Or would Marcus have told you I was being controlling and vindictive and you'd have been caught between us with nothing but my word?" She was quiet again. I refilled her coffee and pushed the sugar toward her. She'd taken it sweet since she was a teenager. "You have a decision to make," I said, "and I'm not going to make it for you. But you should make it knowing the full picture." "I need to talk to a lawyer," she said. "Before I do anything, I can give you Carol Fitch's number. She's good." Sophie stayed the weekend. We didn't resolve anything. There wasn't anything to resolve that quickly. But we cooked together and walked the beach with Chester and talked the way we used to before Marcus made it complicated, which was the thing I hadn't known I'd been missing. Sunday evening, she hugged me at the car and said, "Thank you for not telling me before you had the proof. I know that was hard." I didn't want to give him the chance to explain it away. He would have. "I know." She called Carol Fitch the following week. The confrontation, when it came, was less dramatic than I'd expected. Marcus called on a Wednesday, voice-controlled in a way that cost him visible effort. "Sophie told me she'd talk to a lawyer. She mentioned it. You turned her against me. I showed her bank documents with your signature on them." Silence. "What do you want?" he said finally. His voice had lost the flat conference call quality. Now it just sounded tired. "I want my daughter to understand her own financial situation. That's happened. What comes next is between you and Sophie. The trust, the condition about the divorce. That condition exists to protect Sophie's inheritance from third-party claims. If your marriage is healthy and no such claims exist, it's irrelevant. If there are claims, well, that's not really about the trust." He hung up. Sophie filed for legal separation 6 weeks later. She didn't ask my advice, which was right. She had Carol's number and her own head. She told me after the papers were filed, calm and clear-eyed in a way that hurt to see and made me proud at the same time. The separation and the subsequent discovery of the HELOC and Sophie's own attorney's review moved faster than I expected. Under Oregon law, a home equity loan on a marital property without spousal consent is voidable. Marcus's attorney advised him of this. The negotiations that followed were not my business, but their outcome was Sophie retained the Portland house, mortgage-free, in the settlement. Marcus moved to a rental in Beaverton. We drove up together one September weekend, Sophie and Chester and me, and cooked a big pot of clam chowder using local clams from a shop in Cannon Beach, and ate it on the deck while the sun went down behind a bank of clouds that turned orange, and then dark pink, and then gray. Chester was between us, as usual. "I've been thinking about the coast," Sophie said. She was watching the water. "There are teaching positions in Astoria. Elementary, which isn't my usual, but it might be good, new start kind of thing." I didn't say anything for a minute. 15 minutes up the 101, I said. "Traffic's nothing. Close enough to come for dinner. And far enough for your independence." She looked at me sideways. "You planned for this, didn't you?" "I planned for nothing. I just bought a house with a deck facing west." She smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in months. Not polite, not managed, just genuine and a little tired around the edges the way real smiles are. A bull sea lion hauled out on the rocks below the bluff and started complaining about something in the way sea lions do, loud and completely unconcerned with anyone else's opinion, and Sophie laughed at it, and I laughed with her. She got the job in Astoria in November. Found a small rental on a quiet street with a view of the Columbia, which she said reminded her of the coast but bigger. I helped her move in over a weekend, carrying boxes and assembling furniture and installing a deadbolt on the back door, because old habits. We had Sunday dinners back and forth, her place and mine, alternating. Chester liked her kitchen because she was a generous cook and occasionally dropped things. One evening in early December, I was on the deck with a cup of coffee watching a distant container ship move north toward the Columbia when my phone rang. "Sophie, you know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "That first call when you bought the house. You were watching a heron." "I remember." "I could hear the ocean in the background. I remember thinking you sounded like yourself again, like the version of you I remembered from when I was a kid." I looked at the water. It was dark now, just the white of the surf visible at the base of the bluff, the sound of it constant and low. "I am," I said. "Good," she said. "Hold on to that." After she hung up, I sat for a while longer. Chester was asleep inside, done with the coal. The container ship's lights were almost gone around the headland. I thought about February when this started. The key in my hand in the escrow office, the drive up with Chester's nose against the window. 38 years and one wire transfer, and then someone deciding they had a claim on the quiet I'd bought with my own life. I'd protected it, not by fighting, exactly, by being thorough, by knowing what mattered and refusing to be managed out of it, by keeping my daughter's interests in the same picture as my own. The tide was coming in. I could hear it shifting, getting closer to the bluff, and then the sea lion started up again from wherever he'd settled for the night, still opinionated, still unconcerned. I went inside, called Sophie just to say goodnight, and pulled the door closed behind me against the salt air. The ocean was still there when I woke up in the morning. It always was. That was the whole point. I still think about that first evening on the deck in Cannon Beach. Chester asleep against my leg, the heron working the tide pool. The particular silence of having nowhere to be and no one waiting on anything from me. That silence took 38 years to buy, and someone tried to take it inside of a week. What I've come to understand, not in a tidy, lesson-learned kind of way, but slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something, is that the people who push against your boundaries the hardest are usually the ones who've decided your patience is the same thing as permission. Marcus didn't call me because he thought I'd say yes. He called me because he'd already decided it didn't matter what I said. That distinction is important. You can't reason your way out of a situation that wasn't built on reason to begin with. So I didn't try to reason. I prepared. That's the part people sometimes misread when I tell this story. They focus on the bear, or the trust, or the wellness complaint, the individual moves, and they miss what was underneath all of it. It wasn't anger driving those decisions. It was clarity. I knew what mattered. My home, my autonomy, my daughter's long-term well-being. Every step I took was in service of those three things, in that order, and I never let the noise of what Marcus wanted pull me off that course. Doing the right thing, in my experience, is rarely the loudest option. It's usually the quietest one. It means not calling Marcus back when he hung up on me. It means driving to Portland to sit across from a lawyer and say, "I need to protect what I've built," without any embarrassment about needing the protection. It means waiting weeks to tell Sophie the truth, not because I was hiding anything, but because I loved her enough to want the truth to land in a way she could actually hold on to. Integrity isn't about grand gestures. It's about what you do on the drive home when no one's watching. The thinking part, the preparation, the documentation, the careful sequencing of every response. That's what actually won, not the bear. The bear just sent them back to Portland for one afternoon. What kept them from coming back was that I had already closed every legal door before they found a new one to try. I'd been a teacher long enough to know that you don't manage a hard situation by reacting faster than the other person. You manage it by understanding the whole board, 3 moves ahead. And then there's the part that required something harder than strategy. Sophie, knowing that waiting to tell her the truth might cost me her trust, doing it anyway because the alternative was worse, sitting across from her at that kitchen table while she read documents that were dismantling her understanding of her own marriage, that took a different kind of endurance. Not toughness in the way people usually mean it, more like the willingness to stay present in a painful moment long enough for it to become something useful. She got through it. She's in Astoria now, teaching 3rd grade, driving down on Sundays. Chester's claimed her side of the couch on the days she visits. I bought this house for quiet. I got something more complicated, and then I got the quiet anyway. That's how it usually works when you hold your ground for the right reasons. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but completely. The ocean was still there when I woke up the next morning. It always is.